Welcome to Following. Join us each week as we explore practical ways to follow Jesus in everyday life. Christianity is not an event you attend, it's a life you live. Come along with us as we explore specific and concrete examples of how to do everything that Jesus commanded. This podcast is a weekly discussion of the intersection of the ever-changing situations of life with the unchanging Word of God. Come, follow Jesus with us.
Now great multitudes were going along with him. And he turned and said to them, If anyone comes to me and does not hate his own father and mother and wife and children and brothers and sisters, yes, and even his own life, he cannot be my disciple. Whoever does not carry his own cross and come after me cannot be my disciple. For which one of you, when he wants to build a tower, does not first sit down and calculate the cost to see if he has enough to complete it? Otherwise, when he has laid a foundation and is not able to finish, all who observe it begin to ridicule him, saying, This man began to build and was not able to finish. For what king, when he sets out to meet another king in battle, will not first sit down and take counsel, whether he is strong enough with 10,000 men to encounter one coming against him with 20,000? Or else, while the other is still far away, he sends a delegation and asks terms of peace. So therefore, no one of you can be my disciple, who does not give up all his own possessions. Therefore salt is good, but if even salt has become tasteless, with what will it be seasoned? It is useless either for the soil or for the manure pile. It is thrown out. He who has ears to hear, let him hear. Luke 14:25-35.
All right, welcome back to another episode of Following. It's good to be here with you, Phil.
Yes, it's good to be back in the podcast room.
Yeah, so we're working through, as a church, these 6 practices that I believe you found in Exodus as you were going through the tabernacle portion, the building of the tabernacle in Exodus.
Yeah, I remember when we were preaching through Exodus, I remember thinking...
Was it like 4 or 5 years it took you to get through?
It did not take that
6,
long.
was it?
2 years. 2 years. Anyway, Lloyd Jones preached through Romans in 8 years, so I get off my back. But anyway, the section of the tabernacle is repeated twice at the end of Exodus, almost verbatim. And so it's very significant. But I was reading that and prepping for that and thinking, what in the world, how am I going to apply this to life today? Because Jesus is the fulfillment of that. And so just wondering how I was going to do that. But I found the tabernacle section to be one of the most enlightening, encouraging, and helpful passages in the whole book of Exodus as you begin to dig into it. And really, I think it's talking about communion with God, relationship with God, and what are the kinds of activities that you do in the presence of God. And so when you begin to look at some of the furniture, it's very clear that they have purposeful design, that there's actions that are implied by these particular pieces of furniture or part of the tabernacle. And so when you look at those, what's also very interesting is you see that traced throughout the whole scripture. You see these same practices kind of popping up again and again and again, even in the book of Acts, in the first church. And so I think these 6 practices are foundational. I don't think that I don't think it's an exhaustive list. I don't think it's an exclusive list. I do think it's a foundational list. I think these things are significant practices that Christians need to be engaged in to enjoy God to the fullest.
Yeah, and so specifically this morning we're going to be talking about giving as one of those practices, right. The sacrificial giving to the church, to the poor, to charities, whatever it looks like, sacrificial giving, and kind of getting that from this. Really, I think these last few verses here. Therefore, none of you can be my disciples who does not give up all his own possessions. So Jesus is making some pretty radical statements. Yeah, that you actually can't follow Christ if you're not willing to part with what you have.
The issue is Christ is, all these people are going along with Jesus. They're excited about Jesus. They're fans of Jesus. And he stops in the road and he turns to them and he says, look, you need to understand something. If you're going to come after me, if you're going to be a Christian, if you're going to follow me, what that entails is you can't do that unless you value me more than you value any other human relationship on the planet. Like, I have to be first priority for you,
Mm-hmm.
period. And that is startling. And then he says, and it's not just that, but you need to value me more than you value your own physical life and safety.
Yeah.
That I come first. And so again, this is it's kind of a gut punch, for people when they read this text, like, what are you calling us? It's because he is God, and he demands and expects exclusive loyalty, exclusive devotion. And so then in verse 27, he says, if you do not carry your own cross and come after me, you cannot be my disciple. So in order to follow Jesus, you must embrace the way of the cross, which is saying to God day after day, not my will, but yours be done. I live at your pleasure. It is no longer I who live, but Christ who lives in me. The life I live by faith in the Son of God who loved me and gave himself up for me, because I have been crucified with Christ.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that's the point that Jesus is making. And he tells them, you need to count the cost. You need to understand what it is you're getting into. You cannot follow me. You cannot be my disciple unless this is true of you, unless your heart is completely and radically reoriented around me, where I am the one you cherish above all things.
Yeah, and I think the reason why we find this passage so startling, especially with verses like you must hate your family, is because, like imagine just anybody said this to you.
Yeah.
We would rightfully laugh at them.
Right.
Like, what a joke.
Right.
But the reason why Jesus can say this, like you said, is because he's God. And it's not some like self-obsessed. I mean, obviously God's glory is God's greatest, like he wants his glory to be known to all peoples all across the world. And the reason for that is because when God's glory is known, people are happy in God. They're satisfied in God.
Yeah, I think Piper says it best. God is most glorified in us when we are most satisfied in him. And I think that it is God who satisfies the soul. Like Jesus says, I am the bread of life in John 6:35. So there's the sense in which God's glory is enjoyed. And when we enjoy God to the fullest, when we're satisfied with God, we don't want anything else. That is what brings God ultimate glory. And when that is true of your heart, then you do prefer Jesus to family. You do prefer Jesus to your own life. You prefer Jesus to possessions. You possessions are fine, but you can have them or they can go, whether they're taken or whether you're giving them away, because your joy is not tied to the stuff. Your joy is tied to Christ.
Yeah, and like I think the foundational reason for that is because that's who we're created to be. We're made for God.
Right.
And when we try to live without God, without Christ, I mean, obviously we see this in other cultures and other places, even in our own culture, when people are trying to live in opposition to what they're created to be, they only find despair. They only find sadness and brokenness. But when we find that God truly is the most glorious and valuable thing that we can have, we're brought into right order with who we're made to be. Right. I think you've even used like the illustration of trying to vacuum your house with a lawnmower. Like that's kind of what's happening whenever we're refusing the glory of God, refusing to submit to a text even like this. We're not living out to be our what we're created to be. Right. If that makes sense. Right. And so today, you talked about giving in your sermon, and so today we just kind of want to give you, the listeners, some practical ways to do this, right? We talked about like a foundation, of this, that it has to be from a cheerful heart. Yeah,
well, I think giving is an action that we can do on a daily basis. That is the action of embracing the way of the cross. It's a daily action of saying, not my will, but yours be done. It's a daily action of saying, God, I trust you, not this stuff. It's a daily action of saying, I love and delight in God more than anything else. And so we don't have very many opportunities to literally lay down our physical lives for Jesus. Some of us will have to do that. Not all of us will. But Jesus, in his grace, I think, gives us an opportunity to daily, regularly deny ourselves, sacrifice ourselves, embrace the way of the cross by living as if my possessions are not my possessions. They are God's possessions that he has entrusted into my hands for his purposes. And I think, like, if you go to 2 Corinthians chapter 9, It's a really significant text of Scripture. But at the end of it, so he begins in verse 6, he who sows sparingly shall also reap sparingly. He who sows bountifully shall also reap bountifully. And so a lot of times we read that and it's like, see, you need to give because then God's going to reward you with more material blessings for you to enjoy. But if you keep reading down into verse 8, he says, and God is able to make all grace abound to you, that always having all sufficiency in everything, you may have an abundance for every good deed. Mm. So this abundance that God is going to pour into your lap is for the purpose of good deeds.
Yeah, it's directed at something other than just simply your mere comfort or material enjoyment.
Yes, I don't think it's wrong to enjoy the things that God gives us, but I think that has to be balanced with an understanding and willingness to utilize the resources that God has entrusted to us for good deeds, for helping. And he goes on where he says, as it is written. So this statement that the abundance of God is given into our hands for every good deed, as it is written, he scattered abroad, he gave to the poor, his righteousness abides forever. So he's clearly talking about sharing and helping others who are in need, impoverished. And then verse 10, now he who supplies seed to the sower and bread for food will supply and multiply your seed for sowing and increase the harvest of your righteousness. You will be enriched in everything for all liberality, which through us is producing thanksgiving to God. So again, the purpose of God's enriching of us is for our liberality, for our generosity, which then in turn produces thanksgiving to God because people recognize God is supplying their needs through the instrumentation of our lives. But it's not us meeting their needs so much as it is God who has put this resource into our hand to then meet that need. It's God meeting their needs. We're simply the instrument by which he does it.
Yeah, and he goes on even later in this passage in 2 Corinthians 9. He keeps saying for this reason, like this is why God blesses you. You give, and God blesses you for this, like what you're saying. He continues, and for the liberality of your contribution to them and to all. So like this is a very direct purpose statement for why you're being blessed. It's so that you can continue to contribute to the needs of the saints. Yeah. Like Romans 12 says, to contributing to the needs of the saints. And so that's the aim, the goal. Like we think about that in contrast to what like prosperity gospel teaches that we give to be blessed, like what you're mentioning before. Simply by material, building up the material wealth and health and for your own lifestyle, but this is radically different. We're giving so that we can continue to give. Like it's really kind of neat how that works. God is like using us as a means to bless his people. Why? So that we can give thanks to him for blessing us.
Yeah, I think we need to view ourselves instead of a pool into which God is pouring resources. We are a pipe through which God is pouring resources, and I think too many times we try to hang on to those resources as if they were ours, and what we're doing is just clogging the pipe.
Yeah.
And that is not okay. When you have clogged pipes in your home, it never produces anything good, So you want to understand, I'm not a pool for which God to just fill me up with resources. I'm a pipe through which God's resources flow to others. And I think it's a helpful way of thinking about it. But in order to give like that, if you've never been giving before, then there's some things that you need to think about, because it's easy to jump, you feel convicted, you feel excited, you feel, I want to obey, and that's good. You should, follow that impulse. But you also need to understand that if you don't kind of have a plan, then when it becomes difficult to give, or when you come up against, an obstacle that you weren't anticipating, suddenly you find that enthusiasm waning and you stop giving. And you don't want that to happen. So there's a couple of things that I would suggest. Number one, sit down with your family and talk about this. Like, are we giving what we should be giving? Could we be giving more? And it's not just giving to the church. I think giving to the church is a really good thing for multiple reasons, but it's giving to others who are in need. Like, Are we giving to people who are in need? Now, and it's legitimate need. Again, I think there's a balance here. And the scripture says, if you will not work, you will not eat. In 2 Thessalonians 3, there is no excuse for laziness. There's no excuse for taking advantage of the generosity of others just because you don't want to work. That's not okay. Everyone should work so that they have something to share. But the reality is that we live in a fallen world, and there are some people who cannot work, or for whatever reason, they're really struggling. And they're not being lazy. They're struggling. And so we want to be able to meet that need.
Yeah, so something to add on to that, like maybe someone has made a wreck of their life because of sinful choices, and now they can't afford life. You could say something to the effect of, well, that person has made their bed, they can sleep in it. But let's think about the way the gospel works here for a second. Like the gospel welcomes you back to the table, and an adoption completely wipes the slate clean. And so like one of the most tangible ways that we can see that happening in real time is when we help people who maybe they have made a wreck of their life, but we ought to be helping them even financially,
right?
Like as an expression of grace. Like that's what it's grace. You're giving something that they don't deserve. That's what God did for us,
right? And
so why are we not doing that to others as well? Does that make sense?
Right.
Yeah.
So, I think it starts with a conversation with your spouse and your kids, because I think giving should be something a family does together, But, what could we do? What could we do differently? The second step is, once you sit down and kind of everybody's on the same page, then you have to get a budget together, because if you don't have a budget, you won't plan for your money, and thus your money, you will have less money than you think you have. Your money always goes faster and spends quicker without a budget. With a budget, you end up having more money left over than you realized. And so having a plan for your money, but that also gives you can make decisions like, I'm not going to spend money on that so that I have more money to give away. So you need to sit down and what are my bills? What are my expenses? What are, some legitimate things? And again, it's not wrong to enjoy some of the blessings that God has given you. But remember, you're a pipe, not a pool. So am I using God's resources the way that God wants me to? And you need to be praying about that. God, am I using these resources how you want them to be used? What could I do differently? Would you please give me wisdom? When you ask for wisdom, he always gives you wisdom, and he will make his way clear. So sit down and have a plan as a family. Make a budget. Stick to the budget. And if you've never done a budget before, it'll take 2 or 3 months before you can get that budget really. It takes discipline. It takes effort to just log those things and make sure that you're staying on track. But I think if you continue to do that, you're going to cultivate a habit of frugality that is healthy, that enables you to give more generously. And then you need to just kind of keep your eyes and ears open. Pay attention to people. When you see someone, the people that you want to give to, a lot of times are not ever going to ask for it. They're just slogging along, trying to make. When you notice it, when you hear about it, then just meet the need by God's grace. Trust that the Spirit is guiding you, and meet that need, and do it anonymously, and let God be the one praised for what's happening, because the resources are God's anyway.
Yeah. There was a really cool. We went to Super Summer a couple weeks ago, and there's a really just anecdotal story here, but there was a really neat thing that happened at the end of the week. It was a great week. Like the kids had a great time. The preaching was amazing, and towards the end of the week, the director was kind of expressing some concerns about the future of Super Summer, where we're heading, and one of the big issues is actually just money. Like that's just a real thing that people we have to have money to do events like this. And this older guy who had brought several students, I don't know how he survived. I barely survived the week. I don't know how he's anyway. This older guy was talking to the director about these financial issues, and one of the coolest things, he just like very quietly, casually pulled like $100 out of his pocket and just shook his hand at the end of the conversation, and that was it. And it was just like, man, that is cool. Like he wasn't asking for money. He wasn't asking for extra support. He was just expressing like, hey, maybe be praying about this and this. And that older guy was like, here's a way I can tangibly help in this situation. So anyway, just being aware and cognizant and ready and willing to do those kinds of things. Yeah. So what else? That you mentioned before we hit record, we were talking about things like every dollar as a tool for this.
Yeah,
I think that's Dave Ramsey.
Dave Ramsey's app.
Yeah.
That's the one I use. It's very easy to use and very helpful. The Every Dollar app, it's free.
Mm-hmm.
You can download it and get to work immediately. I like that one a lot. There's lots of good. I mean, I think Ramsey's books are helpful. You may not agree with everything he says in them, but you don't have to agree with everything an author says to benefit from the books.
He's got good principles.
Yeah, so there's some really helpful things in there.
And obviously it's worked for a ton of people. So
yeah. And another thing with giving, if you've never been much of a giver, then I would encourage you to start giving consistently. So maybe you've been an occasional giver. Start giving consistently, whether that's once a month, whether it's once a week, whether it's every other week, or whether, I give when I get paid. That's typically how I do it when it comes to giving to the church. Mm-hmm. Other giving is kind of occasional, but you want to establish some kind of a rhythm and some kind of a pattern for you. And I recommend that you aim at a percentage. I think 10% is a good benchmark there, but I think you need to keep pushing beyond that and force yourself to sacrifice. And but that's not something that happens overnight. And I think that you need to do that slowly, especially as a family. It's sometimes in a family, a husband or a wife will be like, we need to do this, and they're gung-ho, and the other person is not quite there convictionally yet. And so the other one is rushing ahead, and that can cause a lot of friction in the family, and I don't think that's healthy. So you need to pray for the unity of at least you and your spouse before you kind of move forward convictionally. Yeah,
you mentioned another one, the giving ladder. So just kind of for some background, we're doing this as a mentorship program here at Macon FBC, where we spend 4 weeks talking about one thing, like giving. 4 weeks, and one of those weeks we focus on different angles of how to.
So budgeting is part of it. The giving ladder is simply like, if you've never give, then start giving occasionally. Mm-hmm. And if you're an occasional giver, start giving consistently. If you're a consistent giver, then start increasing the percentage of your giving until you become a sacrificial giver. And so I think what you're doing is kind of giving yourself, instead of jumping in the deep end, you're kind of starting in the shallow end and you're moving steadily towards the deep end, so to speak. You're moving yourself in growth. And I think slow, steady steps in the right direction are better than leaps from which then you end up pulling back and not doing anything. Yeah.
I don't really have anything else for.
No, I think that's a good place. I mean, it's not
really hard. Like, you just have to start doing it.
It's a matter of, not my will, but yours be done. That's really what it comes down to. Am I willing to obey the Lord? Am I willing to give up my possessions for the Lord? Am I willing to give up everything for the Lord? If I'm not, that tells me something about my heart that is concerning.
What was that verse you read yesterday? By the way, listeners, I would encourage you to go back and listen to that, because the sermon is a lot more like foundational on getting you to the point where you can start doing some of these more practical things. But there was a verse that you read, and I forget where it's from, but it's, you were bought with a price. You're not your own.
Yeah, 1 Corinthians 6:20, I think, 19 and 20.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Essentially saying that you don't belong to yourself.
Right.
And so stop acting like you do.
Right.
Stop being selfish.
Right. Stop
living for yourself. You exist to glorify God and bless others.
Right.
So start doing that. And one way you can practically start doing that, get the ball rolling here, is by planning out your budget towards the end of giving. Right. Yes, we want to plan to save, like we do like we do need to pass down an inheritance like that. Those are all good things. But the end for us is to bless others. Like you said, we're a pipe that blesses others. So with that, I think we can end this episode. We hope that you found this helpful. Hope you enjoyed this episode.
Share it with others.
Yeah, share it with others. Go back, listen to the sermon, and stay tuned, because we're going to keep talking about what's next week. Is it reading?
Well, this next Sunday is this next Sunday is Communion Day. So so we'll take a break from the Following Jesus series, and we'll be back with washing the week after that. So.
Okay, sounds good. Well, thank you for listening as always, and until next week, keep following Jesus. Thank you for listening to this week's episode. We hope you found it helpful and practical. Follow, subscribe, like, and share this podcast with others. If you would like to hear more on this biblical text, click the link in the description below. Check out hopeformacon.com for more resources to help you in following Jesus.